Who needs hell when you have karma and reincarnation? This is a comment I recently heard on a podcast by Melissa Dougherty, where she's talking about the popular belief about religion is completely wrong. And her argument is that all religions aren't the same, or they're not all seeking the same end. And then she goes through and gives evidence for all that. It's an interesting argument, but I have a problem with it in that it's very superficial. It's at a level that's kind of humankind based, like so many of these discussions. And that comment about reincarnation and karma being kind of like a hell on earth. I have a different perspective, which is looking at it from a higher perspective. And that higher perspective is ultimately God. God is the creator. If we say that God is the creator of everything, before God there was nothing, God created the universe, and eventually here we are today on earth as human beings, and animals and plants and all these other sorts of things that have life. So if you go to the ultimate, it's like a pyramid. We're down in the pyramid at some level. If we go to the very peak, which is the very beginning of everything, and it's not the Big Bang, because the Big Bang was created from matter that had already existed. Who created the matter that created the Big Bang? If we go back and back and back, we ultimately come to nothing, and we ultimately come to God, which is, it's not an old man sitting on a throne. God is basically an intelligent energy, what's called cosmic consciousness. And I like that. The fact that you can't ever prove that, or that someone will say, well, who created God? I mean, how far back do you go? I like the fact that, okay, we can go back to a point where we say, okay, God exists, and God then creates everything that we now know. And even that creation, it could be multidimensional. The fact that we're here on Earth, there could be millions and billions of other universes and dimensions and all these other things. But if we just keep it simple and we just say, okay, God is cosmic consciousness, and that God created through what we on Earth call fractalization, where you create something that is like the original thing, but it's less than. So God creates consciousnesses, individual consciousness. So for example, I am an individual consciousness. And then what then happens with that consciousness? Well, that consciousness can then, which is a purely metaphysical, non-physical thing. It's a life, it's a soul, it's an awareness of being, it's consciousness. What happens to that consciousness? Well, it can go off and it can sync up with a form of life. It could be a single-celled organism, it can be a whale, it could be a human being, it could be an alien, it could be any other form of life, animal, plant, all sorts of things. So if we have that perspective of where we've got cosmic consciousness, it then creates an unlimited, infinite number of consciousnesses, individual consciousnesses, and it's those consciousnesses which then go out into the universe and seek to achieve, over time, a higher state of consciousness closer to the cosmic consciousness. So that's the aim of life. The meaning of life is to start from zero and work up towards a higher consciousness. And if you have that model in place, you can then implant it on a planet such as Earth. You can implant it anywhere. You can implant it on another dimension, a fairy realm. You can plant it on UFOs, on ETs, on aliens, on animals and plants and all sorts of things. Anything that has a life in it, that has some sort of independent energy. I mean, we often wonder about cats and dogs and whales and dolphins and even trees. I mean, we've found that trees can connect and communicate between each other. We know that animals communicate between each other and with humankind, but they're not at the same level of consciousness that we are in our own human body. And then there's probably other levels of consciousness out there in the world. If you're like me, you believe in aliens, and they might be a higher level of consciousness. That's why they're able to do the things that aliens do. So with that model of cosmic consciousness, individual consciousness, and then what I like to call the smartphone analogy, where an individual consciousness connects for a short period of time, for a lifetime, whatever that is, with a physical entity, such as as I said, from single-celled organisms right through to human being, animal, plant, or whatever. So, for example, the model is we have the cosmic consciousness, we have the individual consciousness. Now, my individual consciousness might be millions, billions, or infinitely old, and at some point in time, it has connected with the organic machine, which is my body, my physical body. And for a period of time, 70 to 100 years, it will have a version of that greater individual consciousness which operates my body. So that's what I call the localized consciousness. And it's like a smartphone. You'll get a smartphone that once you provide it with power, you need to make sure it has a software basis, a system that operates it, which is like our body. And then you can add applications to it. And those applications are like the knowledge we learn, so that eventually, and you connect it to the internet, which is like connecting our localized consciousness with our greater external non-physical consciousness. And as such, that smartphone with power, with apps, with software platform, with connection with the internet, can do an amazing lot of things. It's the same as our body. We have a body which we feed, which provides it with energy to operate, this organic machine. And we also have a consciousness, a localized version of our consciousness, which basically enables it to do all the things it needs to do for that lifetime. But it's also connected to our greater external consciousness, which is infinite. And that's why people have metaphysical experiences such as telepathy and precognition and all those other sorts of things that are non-physical, that don't derive from the brain, and that are connected into our greater non-physical consciousness. And that is why this thing about reincarnation is part of that normal setup that the God created cosmic consciousness has put in place. It's for whatever reason, and this is where it starts to get religious and spiritual, and you go, well, you're just making all this up. But if you look at religion and that, you go, well, why are we here? Why were we created? What is the point of it all? And one of the answers you could say, well, God created all these consciousnesses and created the universe, created every aspect of the universe, the physical, the non-physical, metaphysical, whatever you want, love, hate, work, all this sort of stuff. That God created that, free will, all those sorts of things, good, bad, indifference, all those sort of things in order to allow life to exist and to develop. In other words, to occupy the mind. It's like the Greek gods. What are they doing? They're all sitting there up above the clouds, looking down, almost like on a chessboard, looking at what's happening below, with people such as Achilles and all these other sorts of things. And we don't really know the reason why the universe exists. We know it exists. We know that there was something that created it, that there was a system there, that it wasn't just ad hoc. It really had a kind of a process, the whole development of life on Earth. We have science to help explain that, and you can see the logic in it all, and the mathematics, and how things have evolved over time. So it's not just chaos, there's a lot of order there. So why did God do that? We don't know. But that's what I've just outlined, seems to be a system which answers a lot of the questions as to why. The fact is what actually happens. And this is where this discussion by Minister Dougherty comes in, and about how come religions are not all the same, they're not all seeking the same thing. Well, she's right there. Islam is very different to Christianity. It's antithetical. And Judaism, it's antithetical to those. It hates both of those. Buddhism supports reincarnation and karma and all that. I mean, Christianity and Judaism used to support all that, but for some reason around the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, it declared them heresies and just said, no, you have one life, you're born, you live it and you die, and that's it. And they all kind of, Islam and Christianity and all that, have this, about the end of time, and either the Christ or Antichrist will come back and say and do all this sort of stuff. Well, that I don't necessarily believe any of that anymore. What I believe is what's closer to what Jesus Christ taught, and what was revealed in the Gnostic and other very early Christian teachings, where you don't need a church, you don't need a misogynistic church like the Catholic Church, where you've got a whole heap of men telling everyone else what to do, and if you don't follow us and do exactly what we tell you, you're going to burn in hell. I mean, that was a lesson in the Quran as well. Muhammad, a sheep herder trader, is saying, oh no, God spoke to me directly via the angel Gabriel, and what's in the Quran is exactly what he said, and God said this and God said that, and the God in the Quran is really more like the Antichrist of the Bible. He's the one who is vengeful, hateful, revenge, talks about fearing women, fearing children, talks about not about peace, love and compassion at all, but about, you must follow the teachings of the prophet to the nth degree in every part of your life. Whereas Jesus is saying, no, you've got to follow an individual path within yourself to follow, to become that higher, to reach that higher plane of consciousness closer to God. And that's purely, you don't need a church, you don't need to follow certain rules. You need to study and understand and seek advice, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to find that path. Now, of course, the Catholic Church, Simon Peter and all those male apostles didn't like Mary Magdalene, who was the number one apostle of Christ, so, putting this out there. So they got rid of her, and they also took over the church and made it very much a male dominant organisation. In other words, humanity's free will to not only do good but to do bad, to go down a path of narcissism and ego, has overridden a lot of these things. But that's part of the whole free will thing, the thing that God has created a soul, a life, and then it's given it the ability to do what it wants. That could be good, bad and indifferent. And the whole thing about heaven and hell and all this sort of stuff, well, this all comes into question when you realise that it's not necessarily that simple, that sure, there's evil on the world, and you would expect that people are going to be punished. And then you look at karma and reincarnation, you go, well, maybe if you're a bad person, you'll come back as a cockroach, or you'll come back as a lesser being, and then you'll have to then seek to regain your status in the path towards a higher consciousness. Now that path towards a higher consciousness is just that. It's not a path to nirvana or heaven or anything physically like that. But that's part of the path. Now, you can also look at near-death experiences and what people have encountered when they've had a near-death experience and they've gone to some place, a place of light. It's usually a place of lightness. Very rarely it's a place of darkness, but it's a place of lightness. I mean, in your dreams you can have a lot of that darkness and horror and hellish landscapes. But from the experience of near-death experiences, you know that people are going towards the light and this higher level of consciousness, happiness you could almost call it. That's really closer to what is there in between your various reincarnations. So I think that all fits in with my understanding, or the way I've come to understand the connection between God, the fact that consciousness is primary, is at the core of all of this, and that within that it attaches itself to physical things such as the earth, the universe, bodies perhaps. But they're just very much a subset. That we are not the centre of the universe. That our body, our brain, does not create consciousness. It's not that simple. The brain, like the rest of the body, is just a receiver. It's like the smartphone. It's the thing that enables us to operate in this 3, 4, whatever dimensional place that Earth is. And there might be other dimensions also operating in this place as well. So that simple overview, highest level of understanding life based on consciousness, cosmic consciousness, individual independent consciousness, localized consciousness, that can explain all those things. And then, so when we try to explain religions and put them up as the crown of creation, almost the pinnacle of it, well, no, it's not that. Religion, law, social norms, all of that sort of thing are just part of our earthly existence. An alien on another planet might have a similar kind of setup, or not, or they might even not have a physical presence. They might just be consciousness, non-physical consciousness. So yes, this podcast by Dougherty was interesting, but like that comment about reincarnation and karma being like a hellish concept, that took me out of it. I thought, no, I don't agree with that. And then I realised that the level she's talking about in comparing the religions, she's correct, of course, but that's at the secondary level. She hasn't really connected the fact that those religions are basically individuals seeking spiritually, not physically, but spiritually, to connect and understand with their own localized consciousness, their greater individual consciousness, their soul, and with the cosmic consciousness. That's what religions are about. And you can do that in a million different ways. You can do that without religion. You can do it in the Gnostic way, where it's almost saying you don't need the Catholic Church, even though it is totally based on the teachings of Christ. So it's Christian, but it's not Catholic. It's saying follow the teachings of Christ and all that information that was provided. Believe in the Holy Spirit, believe in the Trinity, believe in the Holy Spirit, which is there to help, not to do, but to help, to provide guidance. And with that, because the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, God the Father, they're all 3 persons in one God. They're all God. They're all part of this cosmic consciousness, and they're all, which is infinite and which can speak to 8 billion people at once on Earth. And while it's also speaking to another trillion, billion, trillion, whatever individual souls out there in the greater universe. So it's infinite. So we're not, in trying to understand God, which is the ultimate, we can't ever do that because it's an infinite thing. Everything to do with God is infinite power, infinite ability across space and time and universes and consciousnesses and all that sort of thing. So for us to try to think we can understand and know it is just pure, it's beyond what reality is. We need to respect the fact of who we are and what we are. So yeah, it was a stimulating podcast, but ultimately it was, as I said, it presented at this secondary level, and it didn't really get to the level of pointing out the importance and the primary importance of consciousness if we want to explain all these different religions and what there is a connection with them, if they're a true religion, like Buddhism, like Christianity. Now, I'd question whether Islam's a true religion because it's not seeking spiritual enlightenment necessarily. It's seeking power and control over an individual life on earth. And some of those other religions, Christianity, Catholicism, has sought that as well, to impose its power and will on an individual. Once again, that gets away from the fact that a religion should be something that's basically spiritual. And that spiritual aspect is really come based on the individual and the individual's actions and the individual's understanding. And it's nothing more or less than that. Thank you.